Anakin Skywalker was an adult human male born in an unknown location 41 years before the Battle of Yavin. Sold to Watto by the Hutts, Anakin and his mother Shmi would live out their days as slaves on Tatooine. Anakin was 9 years old when Jedi Master Qui-Gon Jinn found him. Sensing the boy's high concentration of Force sensitivity, Jinn freed the boy and took him to the Jedi Temple, where he would go on to learn under Obi-Wan Kenobi. Anakin progressed his skills quickly as a Jedi, especially during the Clone Wars. Many Jedi suspected that he was the chosen one who would bring balance to the Force and destroy the Sith. However, by the Clone Wars end, he would join the Sith and have a hand in destroying all known Jedi through Order 66. He spearheaded the attack against the Jedi Temple and will be known as one of the greatest Jedi killers of all time. He would then become the enforcer of the new Galactic Empire, ruling by way of fear tactics. The prophecy would not be realized until much later, when Anakin, now Darth Vader, would go on to murder his master Darth Sidious, destroying all Sith from the galaxy. Anakin Skywalker was one of the most powerful Jedi of his age before his turn to the dark side. He surpassed his master Obi-Wan Kenobi and was approaching a skill on par with Mace Windu and Yoda. Galen Marek, codenamed Starkiller, also known simply as the Apprentice, was a young human male born on Kashyyyk, 19 years before the Battle of Yavin. He would be born to two Jedi, Molly and Kento Marek, who deserted the Council due to their relationship. Galen Marek's father was slayed by Darth Vader during the sacking of Kashyyyk. Sensing Galen's heightened Force abilities, Vader would take him under his wing as his secret apprentice. In the battles of Vader's Executor Star Destroyer, Galen would ruthlessly be trained as a Sith assassin. For years, he would do small jobs for Vader, an execution here and there. It would not be until 2 years before the Battle of Yavin when Vader would recognize him as his Sith apprentice, bestowing him with a mission to kill famed Jedi Ram Koda. Over the next few weeks and months, Starkiller would travel around the galaxy, assassinating several notable Jedi. In a few complicated twists of events, Galen would inadvertently help create the Rebel Alliance that would eventually overthrow the Empire. However, he died at the Alliance's expense, becoming a martyr to their cause. Still, Galen Marek's intense training would craft him into one of the most powerful practitioners of the Force in any age. As with all my Versus videos, I will be comparing these two in their primes. This does not necessarily mean their prime age, but the prime in regards to their Force abilities. Simple enough with these two, however, is that they experienced their primes around the same age. For Anakin, this will be at the age of 23, at the tail end of the Clone Wars. For Galen, this will be at the age of 17, during his final confrontation with Darth Vader and Darth Sidious on the first Death Star. Also, I will be taking all of Galen's feats and skills from the novelization of The Force Unleashed, not the video game. Also worth noting is that Anakin's Chosen One status will not be giving him a pass in this fight either. Alright, with all that out of the way, let's start. Anakin Skywalker versus Galen Marek. Anakin Skywalker stood around 6 feet 1 inch tall with an athletic figure. His time during the war would develop him into a hardened warrior with increased endurance, able to maintain fights for several minutes as evidenced by his encounters with Asajj Ventress and Obi-Wan Kenobi. He also attained a great level of speed, often leaping towards his opponents in fights. He would often use Force augmentation to enhance his already astounding strength and speed, becoming a blur of motion to most that watched him fight. During his final confrontation with Count Dooku, it will be described that his lightsaber was so fast, it filled Dooku's entire field of vision with blue. Also, as an apprentice, he was fast enough to slice several missiles from droid ships with relative ease. Not to mention, Anakin had impeccable reflexes. Even as a young boy, he was able to participate in a handful of pod races, something most humans were unable to achieve. He would continue to showcase talent in his reflexes as a pilot as well, outclassing any other starfighter he met. However, he did have one small weakness in the form of his artificial hand, which would be susceptible to electrical charges and manipulation. Still, of his time, he was one of the most athletic and swift Jedi of his generation. At around 6 feet tall, Galen was a slender but athletic young man. Juno Eclipse, his pilot and later lover, would comment on his appearance, stating he was thin as a whip. Though Starkiller did not look like much, he still attained great levels of strength through the Force. In his fight with Shakti, he took several skids from her lightsaber, though he was still able to fight her off. In his final fight with Darth Vader, he was able to contend with him too, despite the fact that hours earlier he suffered from a grave injury to his chest, and he had spent several minutes fighting Imperials to reach Vader. He also showcased great endurance in his fights, which makes sense as he was trained relentlessly by Vader through grueling sparring sessions. During his fight with Cassian Paratus, he would fight through 12 mannequins mimicking the style of the Jedi Council. Though the mannequins were fighting with a crude representation of each combatant's style, they still were many, and Galen was few. All that being said, Galen was able to fight through all 12 and eventually defeat Kasdan. Both Galen Marek and Anakin Skywalker were at the peak of their physical age. They both displayed fantastic competence in their endurance. Anakin Skywalker with his long-fought fights with Asajj Ventress and Obi-Wan Kenobi, Galen Marek on his many missions and fights throughout his journeys. Their tenacity was also quite impressive, especially considering the hardships they went through. Anakin with the Clone Wars, Galen a lifetime under Darth Vader. The only small discrepancy between the two perhaps was their speed. Dooku described Anakin's blade as being too fast to see. Marek could not defend against Shakti's fast strikes, though he did manage to evade a killing blow. So it would seem that Anakin might have the slight advantage as he showcased a bit more speed than Galen. Thus, I give the extremely slight edge to Anakin Skywalker in terms of his physical abilities, though it really is almost a tie. Anakin Skywalker was born with the highest midichlorian count in the entire galaxy. However, this would ultimately hamper his overall use of the Force, as he would have overconfidence in his abilities and would lack tactical variety. It was his hubris that hindered his studies of the Force. Though he trained much later than most of his peers at the age of 9, his skills propelled much faster than theirs, feeding into his arrogance. It's similar to a very talented basketball player who never practices because he has a natural ability with the sport. Eventually, others would advance their skill because they practice and hone their skills while the star stays stagnant in their skill set. This would happen with Anakin, whose Force powers were matched with Obi-Wan Kenobi by the Clone Wars end. Obi-Wan Kenobi, who was not specially talented in the Force, trained and honed his skills, able to match the powerful Force push of the great Anakin Skywalker. However, Skywalker was extremely strong in the Force, able to Force jump great distances and deflect others' Force maneuvers. Not to mention, he held an extremely advanced skill with Force choke even before he was identified as a Sith. What's more, he also had an ability in beast control, as he would showcase in the Geonosis arena. He also had a great aptitude for a special sixth sense in the Force, both large and minute. His sense would help him attune to immediate action, as it did when he sensed Padme was about to be bitten by 2 Cahoons. It would also help him with predicting the future, as he would go on to predict the deaths of both his mother and wife. Galen Marek may not have the highest midichlorian count ever, but he did hold an extreme amount of raw power with the Force. His use of the Force was so respected, even Darth Sidious admitted that one day he could be his equal. Offensively, Starkiller was a well-sharpened tool. His use of mind tricks were impeccable, his use of Force lightning was proficient, and he would even later be able to call on the future at will. Not only did he have a raw ability with the Force, but he also displayed great variety and skill with it. In standard combat, he used it effortlessly with blaster-wielding foes, making great use of the Force repulse technique when he was cornered. In his fight against Drexel and the other raiders of Roxas Prime, he was able to repulse them all before any of them could get a shot off. Galen was not just crafty in his use of the Force, he was also extremely powerful. On Roxas Prime, he was able to redirect a crashing Star Destroyer with only his telekinetic grip, though of course, he did this with great strain. Defensively, Marek left a bit to be desired, as did most offensive Force users did. Against Masters of the Force, he constantly had his Force wall broken. However, he was not completely useless with his defensive abilities. As per usual, Darth Vader would employ telekinetic throws against Galen with objects, much like Vader would do against Luke. Unlike Luke, however, Galen was able to deflect them away, even though they were flying as fast as missiles. Not to mention, Galen also fought through his master's Force chokes. All in all, Galen Marek coupled his raw skill with great application, making him one of the most well-rounded Force users of all time. Though Anakin Skywalker was a prodigy of the Force, he never exhibited any finesse with it. Yes, he was able to pull down a Separatist dreadnought and collapse a huge dome, but Starkiller's redirection of the Star Destroyer was a tantamount feat. So the raw abilities were relatively on par. The difference between the two would be their application of the Force. Galen Marek has showcased more skill with his use of it, integrating it seamlessly into his lightsaber movesets. Frequently, he would group together a telekinetic push with a Force grip, followed by a serving of Force lightning in an effortless combination. He could take on multiple opponents with a grace and ease never exhibited by Anakin Skywalker himself. Therefore, I give the relatively comfortable edge to Galen Marek in regards to his Force abilities. As a Jedi Knight, Anakin Skywalker carried a relatively standard hilt with a slanted emitter and center hand grip block. His lightsaber would utilize a standard blue focusing crystal from the planet Ilum. Lightsaber combat quickly became Anakin Skywalker's favorite activity, even in spite of his Force ability studies. Like his former master, he would dabble in Sarisu, the all-defensive form, and Ataru, the high-energy acrobatic form. However, his preference will be in the fifth form of lightsaber combat, Xian and Jimso. He would advance his skills quickly with these forms as they enabled him to draw from his astounding strength and overconfidence. The fifth form was geared towards an offensive onslaught, stemming from a counter defense. Users of the form would often turn their blocks and parries into instant counters and strikes. At first, I believe Anakin trained himself in the Xian form, as the first 10 years of his Jedi career would be against blaster-wielding foes. Specifically, the Xian variant of Form 5 was geared towards a counter to blasters, blocking the laser bolts and rebounding them back towards the caster. This is one of the reasons why he could not defeat Count Dooku in their first fight, as his use of Form 5 swayed closer to Xian than Jimso. His encounter with Dooku would propel him to refine his use of Form 5, training more exclusively with the lightsaber dueling-oriented Jim So. This newfound confidence and refinement would grant him a strength that would serve him well throughout the Clone Wars against Asajj Ventress and multiple rematches with Count Dooku. In fact, in their final duel together, Dooku acknowledged that Skywalker had become the most refined and masterful user of the Jim So technique, as he would use his brute strength to power through his opponent's defenses. Galen Marek carried a tattered lightsaber hilt with exposed crystal encasing at its center. He would change his lightsaber color frequently throughout his conquest, starting with a red crystal, then to a green crystal, and finally settling on his father's old blue crystal, which he described as having a lighter fit in his hand. Though Darth Vader was a Form 5 specialist, he did not teach Galen in this form, instead wanting him to mold his own style. Starkiller would go on to do just that, adopting qualities from many lightsaber forms including Surisu and Juyo, with a base in Xi'an. However, he had familiarity with all the lightsaber forms, able to decipher them in his opponent's movesets. He was able to do this because he grew up with a lightsaber combat droid named Proxy, who cataloged all the styles of previous lightsaber users. Therefore, Galen became proficient with Surisu, the all-defensive form, through his training with Obi-Wan Kenobi's avatar. Juyo, which was an all-offensive form, he taught himself, but he used to great effect against Ram Koda and Maris Brood. More often than not, he utilized the inverted variant of the Xi'an form. He would employ this against most of his blaster-wielding foes, but the style would also trickle over into his lightsaber combat as well. All things considered, Galen was a fantastic duelist. He understood the intricacies of the other forms enough to defend against them, and he employed his own with great effectiveness. This round is very close, much like the first round. Anakin was pretty much the epitome of the Jim So style, the apex. He was fantastic at turning his defense into a crushing offense, fighting on par with the likes of Count Dooku without the aid of the dark side. Galen was a versatile fighter, also attaining a great defense in Surisu and a devastating offense in Juyo. The best way to look at them both would be to see the specific strengths and weaknesses they had, because any disparity between them would be extremely marginal. As stated before, Jim So was great for counterattack, but as Dooku would criticize of it lacked in mobility. Surisu was great for a standalone defense, but as Kreia would criticize of it only delayed the inevitable. Juyo was great for an offensive onslaught, but its wild strikes left the user open to attack. Thus, I'm inclined to say Jim So is more complete against Starkiller. It balanced defense and offense inherently, while Galen would have to actively switch between the stark differences between Surisu and Juyo. However, Galen is familiar with Jim So and his tactics. In the Force Unleashed novelization, Galen would fight Anakin Skywalker through Proxy's avatar. He managed to defeat the mimic of Anakin Skywalker, recognizing the aggressive Jim So blows. However, this isn't a definitive showing of his skill against the form, as Proxy was not the real thing. The novel reads, despite his intellectual interest in Proxy's handiwork, his heart wasn't in it. He had fought real Jedi Knights now, and fallen Jedi Padawans. Such duels were very real, whereas this felt, suddenly, empty, and no longer served him even as a distraction. Nevertheless, I still cannot discount Galen's skill entirely, as he was able to overcome Darth Vader, though this was due more to Vader's lack of speed in comparison to Galen's. This, of course, would not be the case against Anakin, who matched him and debatably surpassed Galen's speed. All that being said, without making this a tie between the two, I would give the slight edge to Anakin Skywalker as a lightsaber duelist. A battle between the Chosen One and the Apprentice would be a fight of the young and the restless. Both fought with a tenacity not matched by many of their contemporaries. Physically, they were nearly on par, with Anakin only getting a slight edge due to his speed feats, though this is extremely marginal. There is a little bit more of a gap between their Force abilities. Though Skywalker had the most raw ability than anyone else, he lacked in his variety and application. By contrast, Galen had a raw ability coupled with refined application. And as duelists, again, they were almost exactly on par, Anakin taking the slight edge only because his use of Jim-So may outdo Starkiller's pairing of Sarisu and Juyo. Let's set up this fight. Let's say it takes place on the forest moon of Endor, and the combatants are several feet away from each other. I believe it will be Galen who would attack first with his Force Lightning, testing Anakin's ability. Of course, Skywalker would deflect the lightning easily, charging his way towards Starkiller. Galen breaks off his lightning, readying himself in a Sarisu defensive stance. They engage in a fight of Blue Saber versus Blue Saber. Galen is surprised by Anakin's strength, something Proxy never replicated, but still, he holds his ground, blocking all of Anakin Skywalker's cleaves, though he knows he needs to break off the exchange. With a furrowed brow, he locks Anakin's lightsaber in place, uprooting a tree and pulling it towards him. Anakin somersaults away and lands deftly on his feet, but Starkiller is already charging him. Galen jumps in the air. At the top of his arc, he shoots Anakin with a bolt of lightning. Anakin blocks the bolt easily, but it was only a feint from Galen to go on the offensive with his Juyo technique. But still, Skywalker's use of Jim-So turned Galen's furious attacks into even stronger counters, bending Galen's wrist back. In desperation, Starkiller shocks Anakin with lightning. The first bolt hits him. The second, Anakin stops with his gloved hand, but is pushed back by the force of it. Again, Anakin backflips away, shaking his hand. Galen notices this and shocks Anakin again, but Anakin raises his blade, defending himself. Frustrated, Galen attacks relentlessly with Juyo again. Still, there is nothing he can do to penetrate Skywalker, and the Jedi Knight didn't show any signs of fatigue. What's more, he was getting the upper hand, pushing Galen back onto his back foot. As Galen tries to revert from Juyo to Sarisu, he is nicked on the shoulder and thigh by two of Anakin's blinding fast strikes. In a desperate effort, Galen pulls the Force into himself, letting it spring out again around him in a repulse. Anakin flies back into a tree, hitting hard. Starkiller rains lightning on him again, but Anakin defends. But this time, Galen has a new plan, focusing on the mechanism within Skywalker's mechanical hand, forcing it to detach around Anakin's hilt. It works. Anakin's lightsaber falls to his side. Now he was open to Galen's Force Lightning with its full force. Anakin stretches out his hand towards Galen, telekinetically gripping his throat. Starkiller feels Skywalker's hand on his throat, but does not relinquish his own grip with Force Lightning. Anakin's skin begins to fry. The stink of it permeates the wooded area, but he does not release his grip either. Eventually, they both fall to each other's power, dropping to their knees. Galen coughs violently, breathing for fresh air. Anakin breathes heavily, skin stinging, obscuring his once handsome face. They both lift themselves up with great effort, but it is Galen Marek who musters up a force push strong enough to push Anakin back into a tree, breaking it. The tree tumbles over and crushes Skywalker under its great weight. And thus, I declare Galen Marek, aka Starkiller, aka the Apprentice, the victor. Of course, this is all just my opinion. I would love to see your thoughts and comments below. Discussing different scenarios is always my favorite part. Do you think Anakin Skywalker could have penetrated Galen's defenses? Or do you agree that the ultimate victory lies with Starkiller? Peace, love, and may the Force be with you. Always.